In the teenage period, children go through a difficult time for moms and dads. Hormones surge, search for one's place in life, separation from parents, and first serious independent decisions. But the worst is adolescent infatuation, when there is still a lack of experience and knowledge, when the object of adoration seems ideal, and it's good if parents can find the time and strength to explain to the child that first love very rarely becomes the last. The story of Susan Bailey is one of the most horrifying and cruel real criminal stories, where there is everything: a strange love triangle, split personality reincarnation, and even death. Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature. Leave a comment and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot, thank you. In 2008, Susan Bailey lived in Roanoke, Texas. She was 43 years old. She was a very happy woman, and although the town with a population of 11,000 people was not the limit of her dreams, it was exactly the place where Susan needed to be at that moment in her life. The thing is, Bailey was a single mother with 2 children. Her house was on a street where many similar families lived. It was a wonderful neighborhood. Right across the road from the house was a huge park. And when the children were little, they ran there to play. So Roanoke was practically an ideal place for raising kids. For the safety of her son and daughter, Susan, like any mother, was ready to give up fulfilling her own dream. Susan herself also grew up in a small, quiet town, not far from St. Paul, Minnesota, where everyone knew each other. Once in the mid-'80s, when the girl was about 20 years old, a terrible snowstorm hit Minnesota. Snow literally buried the entire state. People couldn't get to work normally. Cars simply couldn't cope with the snowdrifts on the roads. It was after this storm that Susan told her parents that she was tired of living in snow, ice, and cold. She'd had enough. Even before the start of the next winter, the girl decided to move to a warm place and settle her personal life there. She went to Riverside, California, a city located east of Los Angeles. Although Susan was born and raised in the Midwest, she quickly realized that in her soul she was a California girl. She liked the warm weather that was there year-round, and she was glad that she finally had her own housing, where she could manage as the owner. However, that wasn't the main thing she liked about California. Susan met a guy named Richard Bailey and fell in love. Richard was born and raised in California. He was a short, dark-haired young man. He exuded some kind of California vibe. He lived by his own principles. Not fixating on generally accepted norms, Susan and Richard dated, until they realized they were made for each other. In the spring of 1988, they got married. The bride's parents immediately didn't like her daughter's chosen one. They were sure it was a hasty decision, and that Susan could find someone better for herself. The girl's mother and father considered the guy rude, and said that Richard didn't show them proper respect when meeting. However, there was another problem. The thing is, Richard served in the Air Force, and military personnel constantly received new orders. They had to move from place to place often. The newlyweds were in love with each other, and difficulties didn't scare them. After several months of forced moves around the country, Richard retired and worked for some time in the Coast Guard in 1990. The couple had a baby girl, Jennifer, and 5 years later a second child was born, son David. Jennifer studied very well at school. She spent all her free time reading books and drawing. The girl never got into any trouble. This was a child you didn't have to worry about particularly, because Jennifer knew how to make the right decisions from childhood. She had wonderful relationships with her parents, but with her peers, Jennifer didn't make friends. She wasn't bullied at school. She was just a loner by nature. She preferred spending time at home rather than seeking some popularity among classmates. In high school, Jennifer never went on dates or to parties like most girls. At that time, it interested her little. David admired his older sister and wanted to be like her in everything. He also loved to draw and read a lot. The boy went to the library every day to pick out another book. By 2006, the Bailey family had settled in Roanoke, Texas. Susan and Richard had been married for 18 years already, but lately the relationship between the spouses wasn't working out. Richard quit the Coast Guard and hadn't worked anywhere since 1990. He sat at home all day while his wife worked to support the family. In the end, the woman got tired of such a life, and the situation in the house became very tense. As a result, by the end of 2006, the Bailey spouses divorced. Susan retained custody of the children, and Richard agreed to pay alimony. At that time, the woman worked in retail and didn't earn much. Even taking alimony into account, she had to work 2 jobs, practically without days off to make ends meet. At that time, David was 13 years old and Jennifer was 17. Surely at that age, children should have understood that money doesn't fall from the sky, that it needs to be earned, but for some reason, they resented their mom because she was constantly not at home, because Susan didn't spend time with them like before. They considered it unfair that their family couldn't afford to buy some fashionable things, modern gadgets and other material stuff. However, the reason Susan was often absent was that she wanted to provide a decent life for her children. The woman didn't go to parties, didn't hang out in bars, and didn't meet with girlfriends. She earned money, albeit small. But apparently, due to their age, the children behaved selfishly towards their mother. Jennifer and David knew that their family needed to calculate funds economically to stick to the budget. They didn't starve and didn't walk in rags, but they understood that in their case, spending money on unnecessary entertainment was inadvisable. They had a family tariff plan for cellular service. At that time, companies set limits on internet traffic and the number of used minutes. There were limits exceeding, which resulted in huge amounts. Each additional minute or additional gigabyte of internet cost very dearly. Nevertheless, as if in revenge on their mother, Jennifer began calling and texting practically everyone she knew, and David spent much more time online than the tariff plan allowed. The children spent so much that the bill for 1 month amounted to $1,500. It was a fairly large sum, and for a mother who worked 2 jobs to feed her children, the sum was practically unaffordable. Despite this, the children made no efforts to reduce expenses. They simply ignored adult problems. The situation worsened when Jennifer started dating a guy named Paul Hansen from her school. Paul was a year younger. She was 17 and he was 16. The young man lived outside the city in a trailer, so they rode bikes to visit each other. What united the young people was that their parents were divorced, and one of them practically didn't participate in the children's lives. Jennifer no longer saw her father, and Paul had little contact with his mom. He was raised by his father, Paul Hansen Sr. It so happened that Susan didn't like Jennifer's guy at all. She considered Paul strange and couldn't explain the reasons. The young man differed too much from his peers, moreover. The daughter seemed to take her relationship with her boyfriend too seriously. This was the worst nightmare of any parent, and it became reality for Susan Bailey. Jennifer was studying in the senior class of high school and planned to enter an art college in Dallas. After meeting Paul, her behavior and academic performance noticeably deteriorated. The girl should have focused on what she would do after graduating from school, but infatuation clouded her mind, the mother tried to talk to her daughter about her relationship with Paul, but it had no success, however. Susan herself in her youth did exactly the same, marrying against her parents' will, and now history was repeating itself. The more she let Jennifer know that she didn't approve of her choice, the stronger the daughter became attached to Paul. It was some kind of vicious circle. Whatever Paul did, nothing could make Jennifer break up with him. Around the same time when the young people started dating, Paul got very close to a 14-year-old schoolgirl named Mara Lee. This was a fictitious name for confidentiality purposes. The girl's real name was not disclosed in the media, but all reporters called her exactly that. Marilyn was crazy about Paul, literally idolized him. He seemed mysterious, unusual, even a bit scary to her. They spent a lot of time together, and in the end, Paul suggested Mara Lee date. Although the schoolgirl knew that Hansen already had a girlfriend, she couldn't refuse a relationship with the guy she was in love with. Marilee was thrilled with Paul's proposal and naturally agreed. The wildest thing is that these two didn't hide, conceal, or meet secretly from Jennifer. They directly told her about their plans. Paul stated that he had dissociative identity disorder, simply put, split personality. One of his personalities wants to date Jennifer, and the other with Marilee. He called his second personality in love with Marilee Talos. According to the guy, since the personalities were independent of each other, he shouldn't be blamed for cheating on one of the girls in reality. Dissociative identity disorder is characterized by the inability to recall everyday life events, important personal information, traumatic or stressful events. Patients suffering from this disease may experience sudden intrusive disturbances in speech, affective spheres of behavior. But Paul didn't actually behave like a young man suffering from this ailment. He acted more like a very cunning and calculating person. Most likely, he had some mental health problems, but he made up this diagnosis for himself. Only Jennifer and Marilee didn't know about it. In the end, both girls started dating Paul simultaneously. From that moment, everything became even stranger. Paul Hansen told crazy stories about his other personality. According to him, Talos wasn't some other person created by his subconscious. Paul believed that Talos was a real existing man, who lived in the 1700s, that he was an executioner, a real historical figure, whose soul somehow ended up trapped in the body of a 16-year-old teenager from Texas. Paul also believed in reincarnation, the concept according to which the soul after death doesn't disappear, but incarnates in a new physical body. And the guy would like to spend all his lives next to Jennifer and Marilyn. He told both girls that if they spend all their time together and don't let anyone come between them, then they could reincarnate together and spend their next life together too. Both infatuated schoolgirls gladly agreed to reincarnate and eternally stay next to Paul and Talos. Now Jennifer and Marilee were not rivals. They became best friends and lovers, since they made love as a threesome with Paul. Sometimes the young man himself got confused in his personalities and showed feelings for Jennifer as Talos or vice versa. Acting as Paul, he courted Marilee. In general, it was a complex and tangled knot of strange relationships. Jennifer's mom, Susan, didn't know even half,